Hello, welcome. It's Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you want to help support my channel by subscribing, because I don't have Patreon or anything else like that. There is also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such, I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of this land. So welcome back. This is part 2 of a spiel that I've been sort of ranting and raving on about what type of witch are you. And if you haven't watched part 1, I'll put the link below. It's not necessary to watch that first. It's just me rabbiting on about, what is your witchcraft? How does it speak for you? So at the end of part 1, I was talking about the underlying current, energetic current that flows through witchcraft and magic and how it is utilized in that. And this current is actually earth-based power, energy. It's something that I said that our distant ancestors were fully aware of, not to mention at its very existence, something that can be found all around the world, despite the different words and terminology being used. And this might be sort of speculation, but we can see it when we as in people who do that stuff, archaeologists and historians and those sorts of people, when they start to investigate and really look at the structures, like the alignments of stone circles like Stonehenge and Calmness and Karnak, the temples in particular in Egypt and the pyramids, as well as all the other statues and alignments all around the world that we see today. And some of these aren't in plain sight. Some of them are, say, hidden from view, but, and I'm thinking of the Nazca Desert, that when you fly over them, and I haven't, but I love to do that, or from a different point of view, you get a different perspective. It takes on a whole different meaning. And this is what blew me away when I was in Egypt, and I've got to go back, is that when you're actually looking at the hieroglyphs, or not just the hieroglyphs, the artwork in some of these temples, and you're having your guide actually show you pieces or a story that you may not have realized, an interpretation that's not black and white, that sort of bounds into the area of, I wouldn't even say poetic license, because that's not even true, but it's a different interpretation, different understanding of things. And it's almost like you become Alice and fall down the rabbit hole. It's quite interesting. And I know I'm falling down a rabbit hole at the moment. So what I'm wanting to do in this video is to sort of look at some of the magical people around the world who have been tapping into this earth-based power, as well as sort of some of the cosmic-based power in other instances. And maybe I should have had pictures or something, but I haven't thought about that. But because I was talking a little bit about ancient Egypt, it's a good place to start, because they had what was known as the 7 priests. And again, Egypt's history is interesting, because we have like our sort of official viewpoint. Then we have different viewpoints emerging from it. And I find all of these interesting. And I say it like that because I have a foot in both camps. And one just sort of like expands upon the other. And at the end of the day, I think, because these cultures go back, there's so much layering to it. And so some places like Egypt, we only know a fraction. And I don't think we will ever know, because what is available to us, what's officially available to us, was based or written down by outsiders. And we find this in a lot of places all around the world. Can we actually believe the outsiders, because they're looking at things through their lens based on how they see things? And that's another big rabbit hole to jump down. And okay, I won't do that in this video. So the Sem priests of ancient Egypt, these were believed to have evolved from early shamans, or maybe not. Putting it out there, we don't know. These priests were aligned with specific neteru. So that's the actual indigenous Egyptian word for gods, because their gods were not just how we would see deity. Their gods were more like forces of nature. And probably one of the more powerful groups or cults of Sem priests were those of the cult of Ra, the sun god, whose temples in particular Thebes were at Luxor and Karnak. But there were also priests and priestesses at Dendera for Hathor. There were priests and priestesses at Edfu that were aligned with Horus. Of course, we've got the temple of Isis or Aset at Philae. You know, that temple has actually been moved because when they built the Aswan Dam. There were priests of Sekhmet who were believed to have been responsible for healing. And they did this healing through the use of magic, incarnations, amulets that date back as far as the 5th dynasty. Now, this is round about the 25th to the 24th century BCE. So that's a long time. And we know this from the archaeological evidence. Then, of course, there was Abydos, where the priesthood there enacted the resurrection rites, amongst other things, that were connected in with Osiris. So that's ancient Egypt. And again, we have proof of this, of these 7 priests, and also the power of them through their use of magic, or we call it magic, the earth current, the energy. In Africa, there is a term called Sangoma, which I understand comes from the Zulu language, which actually means healer or diviner. And this relates to a person who can direct various rites of passage, as well as narrating history and cosmology of their particular tradition. So it's a little bit like the bards of ancient Ireland, who had this power through the narration of histories, or in particular, a king's history. And there are instances, and I can't remember from the top of my head as to, and he was a famous bard. There is a story that he didn't receive good hospitality from a king. So he told a story of lineage about this king that in a way we would call it a magical spell, but it inflicted upon the king an illness. And it wasn't until the king apologized and then treated the bard with the respect that he deserved that the illness or the ailment dissipated. And today there are sangomas still happening today. Well, just said that, still being initiated and carrying on that lineage, carrying on that training, carrying on those teachings. And it is interesting because, as I said, it's a cosmology, it's a history, it's more than just magical things. And this is something that we see in witchcraft. Witchcraft is becoming perceived as very operational. Just do things, just do the craft. Yet it's forgetting about the narration of the history, the cosmology, all the other behind the scenes things that feed into that flow. And even where I live here in Australia, and especially in the central desert lands, we have the Ngari, or the clever man, as well as other traditional healers. And it's really interesting because there is beginning to become more awareness of the importance of the Ngari, the traditional healers, which is fantastic. And it's quite interesting because whilst their roles may differ, depending on whose country, their clan group, their area of Australia, they're called countries. So the roles may differ, some clever men heal bodily injuries and illnesses, other look at spiritual ailments. And there is again, and this is this weaving of, I'll say, earth current, of the magic of the land, these energies, but like the Sangoma, the cosmology, the history of the land. All of this comes through into their healing practices as well. It's just not focusing on the body. And it's quite interesting because one of the probably more famous or better known clever men here in Australia was, and I should do a little shout out that this person has not ceased, is Jimmy Clements, or was Jimmy Clements, who was also known as King Billy. And he actually formed almost groundbreaking attention or awareness, because Australia's got a very, can I say disgusting? Because it's more than disgusting, horrific history in how we treated our, and still treat our Indigenous peoples. But in 1927, and this is quite a good story, when the British colonialists were opening up their Parliament House in Canberra, which is our capital city, and the Duke and Duchess of York from England were over to cut the ribbons and all the official hoo-ha. King Billy, Jimmy Clements, and other clan leaders, in particular, another clan elder, John Noble, I think is also known as Marvelous or Marvelous Noble. So King Billy and Marvelous walked some 200 Ks or 180 miles from the mission that they were living in or forced to live in at that time to Canberra, and arrived uninvited, of course, at this opening ceremony to Parliament in front of the Duke and Duchess of York to demonstrate their sovereign rights. And this was one of the earliest demonstrations by Indigenous peoples, and in this case, a clever man, Ngākari, a healer, someone deeply connected in with the earth. And led on to, and we still see it today, a lot of sort of like land rights and other activities happening then. But again, we know from history that King Billy was able to sort of tap into these earth energies because he created this sort of public awareness, because everybody wanted to interview him. Who are you? What are you doing here? And he had a platform which unfortunately was not taken on board by the white people, and they are still fighting for equal rights today. But that's another rabbit hole to go down. Anyway, coming back to magical people, because I've sidetracked it. Now, I'm not saying that what these people, these cultures referred to is identical to the magic that's found within witchcraft, but there are similarities. And I think this is a problem that we have had since colonialistic times, where everything in their new land was perceived through their lens, their very narrow lens. And we see that today. Everything's been called witchcraft. And it's just like, well, in all honesty, maybe it's not. And I think we actually owe other cultures their right to use their terminology for what it is. Just because it looks like witchcraft, how we would identify with witchcraft, it may not be, because it may actually be coming from a culture where they view witchcraft as sorcery. And by that, I know sorceress, the word sorcery these days is also becoming popular. But I'm talking about probably a more sort of standard, typical, stereotypical perception of sorcerers, and that it's a darker form of magic, probably a little bit scary, external. Yeah. But yeah, there's similarities, and there's this essence that I'm sort of trying to talk about if I don't go down too many rabbit holes. And I do know that in some instances, I'm pushing the boundaries, the descriptions, boundaries a tad here. It's like people who run around calling themselves shamans, 9 times out of 10, they're not a shaman trained in Siberia, which is where the word comes from. But what the meaning is that, hopefully, they are trained in some kind of shamanic-like practice or out-of-body practice, or that is connected in with earth energies. And I suppose this is when people start calling themselves witches and they practice witchcraft. There used to be sort of like guidance, boundaries as to what that contained, but these days those boundaries has dissolved, and anything can be witchcraft these days. And even the use of the word has changed. But what these people that I'm trying to talk about before I jump down more rabbit holes, what they knew from the ancient Egyptian Sem priests through to the Nakeri people, the clever man, is that when it comes to magic, magic is not something that's actually created by humans. Not really. It's what we are doing. We are tapping into, we are aligning ourselves with an essence, an underflowing sort of energetic current that ideally stems from nature or the cosmos, depending on belief. And that is what we as witches take and shape into magic that can be found within witchcraft. And as I said, some people don't use the term witch to describe their practice, as they may not have been aware of it. The origins of this word of witch stems from, I've mentioned this earlier on my channel, the Old English, the Anglo-Saxon word. So that came millennia after the Sem priests of ancient Egypt. Then across time, in particular around, say, from the 14th, 15th centuries onwards, negative interpretations were associated with the word witch. And these continue today, especially even in the Western world. If you live or reside in more Catholic orientated countries like Spain and Portugal, and even throughout South America, and definitely in Africa, and I guess even some parts of the US, even Britain, depending on the audience as to the interpretation that this verse carries on. And these negative interpretations herald mostly back to the witch trial period of the Middle Ages. And it's almost ironic because we do have people these days running around trying to claim that that's how far back some of their lineages go. It's each to their own. Yep, time to move on. So when we attempt to sort of strip back the word witch, strip it back to any possible original meaning, there's also a degree of speculation implied because we honestly do not know. However, some interpretations have included, say, shapeshifter or energy shifter. There was a connection in the early 2000s, in particular Wicca, as coming from willow, meaning to bend. I think that's been disproven. Wicca comes from the Anglo-Saxon and was witchy, witcher, and that was just how they pronounced it, as opposed to how it was written. And when these interpretations are applied through the lens, when looking out to what's happening, especially within spiritual realms, again, we are tapping into nature, into energy, into the manipulation and shaping of this energy in order to achieve a desired outcome. And if that is what we perceive witch and magic ultimately is, then yes, there is a similarity towards what we're doing today if we're actually tapping into this energy to manipulate it, to shape it, to change it to a desired outcome. And what the Sem priests do or did, even what the Nakari people do, the Sangoma people do in parts of their practice. But still, it doesn't mean that they are ultimately witches. Again, coming back to that word shaman, it has many layers today. And rightly or wrongly, there has been this generalization of it being connected in with nature-based practices, drawing from the sort of simulation or connection with ancestors. But I think there should also be a definition between that and true shamans, or the original shaman, or the original use of the word connected to the Siberian peoples, because they are still a living group of people with practices alive today, and there needs to be respect shown there. And it's not just in Siberia, it's all that sort of top northern area. That's where the shamans, their magic came from. Even the shamans of, say, Central America, ayahuasca, we call them shamans because their practices have there's similarity in their practices, but what was their indigenous title? Do they like the word shaman being applied to what they do? Has anybody asked them? I think that's important as well. But this is when we get caught up in labels. And when we sort of, I guess, look at the core essence, when we strip back these labels, when we sort of look at the simulation, at the connections that our ancestors, sisters possibly had, especially from a Western background, we have lost a lot. Maybe we use these titles from other systems because we don't know what our people would have called their practice. So we adopt other people's titles, and then, yes, we're crossing that boundary of cultural appropriation. Anyways, getting into a lot more rabbit holes than what I want to. But when it comes down to the essence, the energy that flows through witchcraft and magic, that stems from the natural world. And what we're doing, we're utilizing that energy, that power, that magic to create a portal or a means to shape or to create something. And then again, there's also a degree of poetic license taken. However, I mentioned before, contained in even some of the mythos, various teachings, it is believed that our predecessors, our ancestors, all had this deep connection to the natural world. That what we do today, there's a similarity. There is this deep interconnectedness with how they saw their world and how maybe we are seeing our world today. So likewise, the words of magic and witchcraft in their general use can be problematic. As I said, these words come from Anglo-Saxon, thanks to colonialization, they appear all around the world, largely to describe something that's basically not Christian. Today, the words witch and witchcraft tend to be applied to almost anything. And it's really increasingly difficult to ascertain the boundaries. Maybe people just don't care anymore. And here we are teetering on a brink of being caught up with words, with labels. And I think at the end of the day, regardless of all of this, regardless of practice, tradition, it is important for you, whatever path you end up following, that you remain true to you. And I said this at the beginning of part one, that there seems to be a lot of things being practiced in the name of witchcraft these days that I personally can't ascertain as to how or why. But that does not necessarily mean that they are not right to be labelled as such. It just means that these practices, these references, fall outside the scope that I'm personally using to classify witchcraft as. And if it resonates with you, that's okay. As I said, you do you, I'll do me. But don't expect me or someone like me to accept such things into my own interpretation of the craft. To thyself be true. And I think that's another problem that we have. We live in this world where instant, we need stuff straight away. Some of us don't work like that. Some of us, especially in the more traditional spheres, we have rules and regulations. You want to come and say, play, be a member of our team, play in our game. We're not changing our rules for you. Just because you want to join doesn't mean that we have to let you. We might go, oh, show me that you're interested, really interested. Anyway, all I offer here are just some thoughts of my own practice, my own experience, my own exploration over the years. Nothing is written in stone, even within initiated traditions. While there is a framework, this framework has been set and continues to be followed many years later simply because it works and it's proven work. Yet it's not all there is. It's like a foundation from which we build our practice. This proven work opens portals that need to be opened. And there's almost an end result because we are connecting in with a specific way. And if it works, sometimes you don't need to change it. But that also doesn't mean that there isn't room for experimentation and for the encouragement to explore, to try something different. Yeah, I do think in our modern world, we do get distracted with all the myriad of glittery things out there. And a lot of people suffer from FOMO, the fear of missing out. And I think often it's because while there is so much out there, this new stuff, a lot of it is actually lackluster. It doesn't give us the spiritual sustenance, nurturance that our body, that our soul is seeking. And when there is a well-trodden path that maybe doesn't shine so brightly because there's been many hands touching it. And that means, however, that the substance is still there. And maybe what it needs is a little bit of polish, a little bit of brush soap to renew that shine. Yeah, in our society that, and I mentioned this in the first video, is very materialistic, very consumer-driven, very thrown away. So our spirituality has become superficial, lacking in substance, almost a cheap plastic knockoff, which in turn leaves us for wanting more. And instead of digging for something a little bit deeper, we go off chasing the next glittery thing because it's easier to do that, to get something bright and shiny than getting out the cloth and the brasso and adding a little bit of elbow grease. I mean, have you ever tried polishing anything? Just a little drop of brasso, and the next thing your cloth is all black. And the harder you rub, the blacker your cloth gets. But when we go past through, it's almost like an alchemical stage. When we go through that blackness, we look at what we're polishing. We then see the shine. And we do then get the gratification. That soul yearning is able to be fulfilled. But that takes work and it takes time. And it's not something that we can just pass off. It's not instant. But when we put the work into it, we know it will last. And that, to me, is what witchcraft is all about. true witchcraft, the true magic of witchcraft, is that we go beyond the surface level to something that is deeper, much deeper. Blessings.